Have you ever heard a story so strange, so perfectly bizarre, that it just has to be true? Well, gather round, because I've got one for you today, passed down from my own grandmother. It's a tale about a wedding that happened right here in New York City, in a certain stately old church. I'm not even sure if the original building is still standing, but honestly, I don't want to know. Sometimes, a little bit of mystery makes the story even better. Don't you think? This church isn't just any old building, it's surrounded by a beautiful green, filled with those marble monuments you see in old cemeteries, urns, pillars, obelisks. It's a peaceful, timeless place right in the middle of the city's chaos, and it's the perfect setting for a legend. The story centers on a marriage, but this was no ordinary boy meets girl romance. This was more like boy meets girl. They go their separate ways for 40 years, have a few adventures, and then meet again. Let's meet our groom, a Mr. Ellenwood. At 65, he was what you might call a character. Imagine a lifelong scholar who never really had a goal for his studies. He was shy, a bit of a recluse, and definitely lived in his own head. Like a lot of people who spend too much time alone, he could be a little selfish. But then, out of nowhere, he'd show this surprising flash of generosity. He was a true gentleman, very refined and particular, but he also had a habit of completely ignoring the normal rules of society whenever he felt like it. In fact, his behavior was so odd, so eccentric, that people whispered about him. They'd see him do something completely wild, and immediately start wondering if there was a touch of madness in his fan. Illy tree, but the truth was simpler. And maybe a little sadder. Mr. Ellenwood just lacked a purpose. He had a brilliant mind and deep feelings, but with nothing to focus on, they just sort of churned inwardly, creating these strange outbursts. His life felt aimless, and his eccentricities were the strange fruit of a life lived without a destination. Now for the bride. The widow, Mrs. Dabney, was his complete opposite in almost every way except for her age. Her life had been a whirlwind. She was forced to break off her first engagement to Mr. Ellenwood, as it happens, and married a much older man. She was a perfect, dutiful wife, and when he passed away, he left her a very wealthy woman. Next, she married a younger Southern gentleman and moved to Charleston. That marriage was not a happy one. After years of unhappiness, she found herself a widow once again. You can imagine what a life like that does to a person. Any delicate, romantic feelings she might have had were pretty much crushed by disappointment and duty. Her first marriage was cold. Her second was unkind, and frankly, she had probably come to associate her husband's death with her own freedom and comfort. She became what you might call a philosopher of the heart, a woman who could bear any emotional storm with a calm face, having learned to live without the happiness she once craved. She was incredibly wise about the world, but perhaps not the most sentimental person you'd ever meet. But she had one little weakness, one thing that made her slightly ridiculous, and in a strange way more likable. She refused to grow old. Since she had no children to carry on her beauty, she decided she'd just have to do it herself. She fought against time with everything she had, clinging to her youthful look so fiercely that it was as if Father Time himself just gave up, deciding it wasn't worth the effort. So, you can imagine the stir it caused when the news broke. This worldly, pragmatic woman was going to marry the unworldly, eccentric Mr. Ellenwood. Everyone, from casual gossips to deep thinkers, had the same theory. Mrs. Dabney must have been the one to arrange it all. It was a practical match, after all, and she was nothing if not practical. For her, maybe this late-in-life reunion with her first love offered a tiny spark of the romance she'd lost along the way. The real mystery was Mr. Ellenwood. How on earth did this shy, awkward man, who was terrified of being laughed at, agree to a plan that was both so sensible and so completely laughable? The whole city was buzzing. But while they talked, the wedding day arrived. The ceremony was set to be a big public affair at the Episcopal Church. The galleries were packed, and the pews near the front were filled with spectators eager to see this unusual union. As was the custom, the bride and groom were to arrive separately, and, by some twist of fate, the groom was running a little late. Then, the moment arrived. The sound of old-fashioned carriage wheels echoed outside, the church doors swung open, and the bridal party entered like a sudden burst of sunlight. The group was full of young, happy people, all laughter and bright colors. They practically floated down the aisle, their energy making the old church feel like a ballroom. They were so vibrant, so full of life, that at first almost no one noticed the strange thing that happened right at the entrance. The very instant the bride's foot crossed the threshold of the church, a sound echoed from the tower above. It wasn't the joyful peal of wedding bells, it was a single, deep, heavy toll, a funeral knell. The sound vibrated through the air, died away, and then returned, a long, solemn note that followed her as she walked toward the altar. In the gallery, a young woman whispered to her date, "Good heavens! What an omen!" Her companion, a witty young man, whispered back, "On my honor, I believe the bell has the good taste to toll of its own accord. What does a woman like her have to do with weddings? Now, if it were you, my dearest Julia, approaching the altar, the bell would ring its happiest tune. Everything seems perfect until a single, ominous toll of a bell cuts through the air." The bride and her party, caught up in the excitement, barely noticed the first stroke. They continued down the aisle, a dazzling parade of crimson velvet, shimmering silk, and glittering gold. The bride herself is a paradox, her aged, wrinkled face adorned with the splendid attire of a young maiden. She looks like a withered rose, a living lesson to the youthful beauties around her. But then the bell tolls again. This time, its sound fills the church with a tangible gloom, dimming the bright spectacle as if a mist has rolled in. The wedding party falters. They stop, huddle together, and whispers of confusion and fear spread through the crowd. You can almost picture them. A vibrant bouquet of flowers suddenly shaken by a harsh gust of wind. The bride, however, displays remarkable composure, though she shudders at the sound, as if the bell's toll struck her heart directly. She recovers quickly. While her attendants are still in disarray, she takes the lead and calmly continues her walk up the aisle. But the bell keeps ringing, its slow, mournful rhythm echoing the sound of a funeral procession. Reaching the altar, the widow smiles at the clergyman. "My young friends here have their nerves a little shaken," she says. "But so many happy-sounding weddings have ended unhappily. Perhaps I'll have better luck under such different circumstances." The rector, looking deeply troubled, replies, "Madam, this reminds me of a sermon by Bishop Taylor, who spoke of marriage with so many thoughts of death and sorrow. It was as if he decorated the bridal chamber in black. Perhaps," he adds, trying to find some meaning in the moment, "we can draw a sad but useful lesson from this funeral knell." He then sends an attendant to find out who is ringing the bell and put a stop to it. As they wait, a tense silence falls, broken only by whispers and a few stifled giggles from the younger guests. For a moment, the widow's gaze drifts towards the memorial she had dedicated to her first husband. Her thoughts then turn irresistibly to another grave, another man she once loved. It's as if two buried husbands are calling to her from beyond. A flicker of true feeling crosses her face. She thinks how much happier she would have been if, after a life of bliss with her first love, this bell were tolling for her own funeral. Why, she wonders, did she come back to him, to the man who now awaited her, when their hearts had grown so cold to each other? Just then, a new whisper spreads through the church. A hearse, followed by a train of coaches, is slowly making its way down the street. A funeral procession is heading for this very churchyard. At that exact moment, the footsteps of the groom and his party are heard at the door. The widow looks down the aisle, her hand gripping her bridesmaid's arm so tightly that the young girl trembles. "What's wrong?" the girl cries. The widow whispers, her voice filled with a strange dread, "I have this foolish idea. I'm expecting my bridegroom to arrive with my first two husbands as his groomsmen." The bridesmaid lets out a scream. "Look! The funeral!" And as she speaks, a dark procession enters the church. At its head are an old man and woman dressed head to toe in black, their faces pale and their hair white as snow. Behind them, another pair, just as ancient and mournful, follows. Then another and another. As they draw closer, the widow recognizes them. They are old friends, people she danced with in her youth, now returned from their graves to claim her as one of their own. The spectators in the pews shudder as the procession parts, revealing the figure they had concealed. There, in the center, stands the groom. But he's not in wedding attire. He is dressed in a shroud. His face is as still and calm as a man in his coffin, but his eyes burn with a wild, feverish light. He is the living dead, a groom fit for a funeral. Motionless, he speaks, his voice seeming to merge with the tolling of the bell. "Come, my bride," he says. "The hearse is ready. The sexton is waiting at the door of the tomb. Let us be married, and then to our coffins." The widow's face turns as ghastly as his. The scene is a powerful, terrifying image of life's vanities crumbling before age, sorrow, and death. The clergyman is the first to break the silence. "Ellenwood," he says gently, "you are not well. The ceremony must be postponed. Please, go home." The groom replies in that same hollow tone. "Yes, but not without my bride. You think this is madness. But if I had decorated my old, broken body with bright colors and forced my lips to smile while my heart was dead, that would have been madness. Now, let everyone here say which of us came without a wedding garment, the bridegroom or the bride?" He steps forward and stands beside her, the stark white of his shroud a shocking contrast to her glittering gown. "Cruel, cruel." The bride groans, her heart breaking. "Cruel," he repeats, his voice suddenly full of wild bitterness. "Heaven judge which of us has been cruel. In our youth, you destroyed my happiness. You took everything from me and left my life an empty dream. And now, after 40 years, when I've made my peace with death, you call me back to the altar. I am here, as you asked. But what is left for me? Only your decay and death. So I have brought these funeral guests, and I have come in my shroud to wed you with a burial service, so we may join our hands at the door of the sepulchre and enter together." But this wasn't just madness. The stark, terrible truth of his words pierces the bride's heart. All her vanity, all her worldliness falls away. She seizes his hand. "Yes," she cries. "Let us wed, even at the door of the tomb. My life has been empty, but at its end there is one true feeling left. It makes me worthy of you. Time is no more for us. Let us wed for eternity." The groom looks into her eyes, and a single tear falls from his own. "Beloved of my youth," he says, wiping the tear with his shroud, "I have been wild with despair. Forgive me. It is evening for us now, and our morning dreams are gone. But let us join our hands as lovers separated by life, who meet again only as they leave it, and find their earthly love transformed into something holy." And so, surrounded by weeping guests and withered mourners, the union of two immortal souls was solemnized. The organ began to play, its music mingling with the funeral bell, then rising into a triumphant anthem. The bridegroom in his shroud, and the bride, her face now pale and serene, took each other's cold hands. As the married of eternity walked away, the organ's glorious peal drowned out the wedding knell, marking not an end, but a new eternal beginning. What a powerful and moving story about love that transcends time and even death itself. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this journey into classic literature, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Until then, take care.